Good morning. I'm Peter Stanton, publisher of the Worcester Business Journal, and on behalf of WBJ and our event partners, State House News, welcome to the second part of our webcast series on New England's second largest and fastest growing city. We have a terrific lineup of speakers today and look forward to a great discussion about the accelerated rate of development in Worcester and what the future holds. Thank you for joining us this morning. I also want to give a special thanks to our platinum sponsors for this event, Bowditch and Dewey, and Workers Credit Union, who have stepped up to make this series on Worcester Emerging happen again in 2022. And a special thanks also goes to our gold sponsors, Mogul Architects and UMass Chan Medical School, and our supporting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts and Lamoureux Pagano Associates and Architects. We appreciate the partnership of all these fine organizations who are actively building and supporting the tremendous growth we've seen over the last several years in Worcester and the Central Mass region. This morning's session, following last week's program, is a continuation of our 2021 Worcester Emerging series, where we first took a deep dive into the who's, what's, and why's behind Worcester becoming one of the hottest markets in New England. In today's session, we're going to have a cup of coffee with some of the city's top developers and investors and get their take on how they view the market, what it's like to do a project here, and we'll learn about more of their current developments and plans for the future. Before we begin the program, however, I'd like to ask each of our platinum sponsors to share some brief remarks, welcoming remarks, and I'd first like to introduce Mark Bornstein, who is an attorney at Bowditch and Dewey. Mark.
Thanks, Peter. Good morning, everyone. As Peter said, my name is Mark Bornstein. I'm an attorney at Bowditch and Dewey in Worcester. I'm a member of the real estate group. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. Bowditch is thrilled to sponsor this particular series. For those who don't know us, Bowditch and Dewey has been around for over 100 years, practicing in Worcester. Our real estate group works side by side with developers. So we're pretty acutely aware of the issues and opportunities facing development in Worcester. So I'm looking forward to the panelists speaking today. I believe they're going to provide us great insights regarding the development in Worcester. They collectively are some of the great success stories of Worcester's recent development. So thank you to the Worcester Business Journal for hosting this particular forum, and thank you all for joining this morning. Back to you, Peter.
Great, thanks, Mark. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Sana Upadhyay. Sana is the VP and Business Relationship Manager at Workers Credit Union. Sana.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning to you all. Like Peter's introduced me, my name is Sana Upadhyay. I'm a Vice President of Business Relationship Manager at Workers Credit Union, and we are honored to be a sponsor of Worcester Emerging 2020. The sound of a city that is thriving is that of a busy construction crew and cranes, creating new opportunities for the growth and employment. Worcester's centralized location, thriving business, diverse economy, and educated workforce have made it a perfect spot to start something new, whether it's a new business, new housing complex, or a new baseball stadium. And in the next hour, I look forward to hearing the plans of investors and developers to make Worcester an even better place to work and live in future. Workers Credit Union has been proud to be part of Worcester's business community throughout lending and small business partnership for decades, to open our first Planet location in Worcester in 2020. Our experience has exceeded our expectation, and we look forward to working with people and business of Worcester in many, many more years to come. Thank you for including us in this event. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Sana. And now, before I introduce our moderator, just two quick housekeeping notes. One is this event is being recorded, and it's going to be shared with every registered attendee after the event. So look forward to that in your email. And then the other note is to ask a question of our moderator or of the panel. Simply type it into this little Q&A box located on your screen, and our moderator will try to get to as many of those questions as possible during the conversation. So our moderator today is Samantha McDonald. Samantha is a partner with Bowditch and Dewey. Her concentration is on business and real estate property law within the firm's real estate and environmental practice area. Samantha, thanks for joining us this morning, and I'll hand the program over to you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Peter. It is hopefully going to be an exciting conversation. We've got some great people here who know a ton about the city and have been shaping the city for a while. And let me introduce first Mark Rengel, who is the Vice President of Development for Menkiti Group.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Rengel, Vice President of Development for Menkiti Group. We are based in Washington, D.C. and Worcester, and have been working in the region for about 5 or 6 years locally. Our most recent delivery was Chatham Lofts, which you see on the upper right of the slide at 6 Chatham Street, the former Worcester YWCA. And we are in progress on a variety of commercial and residential conversions downtown, including 554 Main Street, 401 Main Street, the former Shaq's clothing store, and 526 Main Street at the corner of Chatham and Main. Really hyper-focused on the theater district in Worcester, and really excited to share our experience there. Our mission as an organization is to transform lives, communities, and careers through real estate, and we're excited to share, again, our experience in Worcester through that.
Great, thank you so much. Next up, Chip Norton, who is the Managing Director of Franklin Realty Advisors.
Good morning. Thank you, Samantha. Once again, my name is Chip Norton, Franklin Realty Advisors. I've been developing in Worcester, both downtown and the perimeter, for over 30 years. Numerous projects, probably 12 projects in total over that period of time. My most recent projects that we're working on is Mercantile Center, which is the redevelopment of the former Worcester Galleria Mall, 650,000 square feet of office and retail. And the project is gone through a major, about $30 million worth of renovations, and we're in the process now of completing the leasing of the office space and the retail. We have our first restaurant opening next Monday, 2 Mercantile, and then adjacent to that on the plaza, Ruth's Chris in construction will be opening in July. We also represent Unum Insurance at 1 Mercantile, which is a building across the street. We're helping work with Unum to release that building as they vacated last summer. And we've got some pretty good activity. The office market has really popped up very nicely as we come out of the pandemic. And my other large project that I'm working on in Worcester is Worcester Business Center. The redevelopment of the old Tom McCann factory building went through about a $15 million renovation. And at this point, we're about 90% lease. And some of you may have noticed we just completed our large outdoor project, a 1.5 megawatt carport solar panel project covering about 2/3 of the parking lot around the building.
It's very cool looking, actually. Next up, Michael Lozano, who is the Vice President of Development for Trinity Financial.
Good morning. Thank you, Samantha. So I'm Mike Lozano, Vice President with Trinity Financial based in Boston. We also have an office in New York City and develop property pretty much everywhere in between, but our sort of our heart and our bread and butter is in gateway cities. Our most recent project in Worcester is the renovation of the old Worcester County Courthouse into the courthouse lofts. It's 118 mixed income apartments, and it also has a museum dedicated to the life and legacy of Marshall Major Taylor, who was one of the first African-American champions of any sport, and we're very proud of that. The building was originally built in the 1840s and had several renovations in the 1870s and 1890s and 1950s. And as you can imagine, that was led to a very, very complicated design and construction project. But we finished it last year, and we are completely and totally leased up and have a very, very nice community living there today.
The museum is a very neat addition, and you've done a great job at respecting the historical aspects of the courthouse. I'm sure it was not an easy project to put together. So welcome Russ Haims, who is the president of Hampton Properties.
Thank you, Samantha. Yes, I'm president of Hampton Properties, and most recently, as probably most of you are aware, I acquired the campus of Becker College, except for a few of their academic buildings. I pretty much have always operated in the residential space in the neighborhoods, nothing in the main business corridor. I've usually seeked out the most distressed properties, but now it's sort of morphed into all of these beautiful natural architectural wonders that Worcester has. I tend to seek out the more distressed assets in Worcester, always have. The top left, as you can see, that used to be an office building for Becker College. It was recently transferred and sold to a family. So we're bringing back the neighborhood from commercial use to residential, which was part of my mission when I discussed this with Becker initially about acquiring their assets. And it's wonderful because that's how this property was built. It was built for a family originally, went into commercial use, and it's back to a family. Some of the others you see are these gorgeous Victorians. The lower left is a really beautiful mansion on Oak. These are all going to become, as you see the brick one, part of the WPI expansion into that neighborhood. As you may know, last year they started their first residential dorms over the side of Highland Street, calling it South Village. It's worked so well, and their demand for their incoming freshman class has increased so much they need more housing. They're expanding to 6 or 7 more properties, addition to the 3 they have, further expanding into the neighborhood. And I am very excited about it. I'm glad to be a catalyst for it. And I know a lot of the wonderful neighbors that live in the area that both rent and own homes in there are thrilled, because everybody was, of course, concerned about the Becker closing and what was going to happen with the properties and the vacuum that it might have created. I think everybody is pretty much consistently on board with the fact that WPI is a wonderful influence and will only enhance the beautiful area. And I'm glad to be a part of it.
Thank you, Russ. It was a great article on the project on the TNG yesterday, I think. So congratulations on that new project. So welcome, everybody. Chip and Russ, you guys have both been involved in developing Worcester for over 30 years. I'm taking a stab at the timing. How has the market evolved? What's been your experience in developing that is different now from 10, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, would you like to go first?
Sure.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I've noticed there's a lot more competition than there used to be. I bought my first property in 1987. And there were not that many people looking to buy multifamily houses. Once again, the residential market, everybody was focused in the Boston or within 128. So I find kind of an open field with a lot of options. And that has quickly tightened with a lot of increased demand. So that has changed. But I noticed that I have evolved. I have become much more focused on transforming the more distressed assets of residential neighborhoods. And I focused more on the college neighborhoods as well. Instead of just random purchases. So that is one where I have changed. And I think the market has changed tremendously as well as a result of that demand.
How about you, Chip?
On the office, yep, on the office market, historically, Worcester's been a market where we've seen few new tenants enter the market. It's been mostly what I call shifting sands of existing tenants moving around the buildings. In the last 5-6 years, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we're seeing a lot of new opportunities come into the city. Both tenants that might have been on the outskirts of downtown now moving downtown, with companies coming from primarily the east of Worcester, moving out of suburban office parks and buildings, and primarily to attract the millennial workforce. They have found that a number of people new in the workforce are looking for an urban environment rather than to be stuck out in the suburbs in a business park with no amenities. So I would say that's probably the biggest change, and that started to occur in 17, 18, and we're seeing that same trend as we come out of the pandemic.
Interesting. We'll circle back to the office occupancy question in a little while. Mark and Mike, your companies are newer to Worcester. You're not the competition that Russ referred to, because you guys have different properties that you look at, but emblematic. What initially made you look to Worcester? Mike, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so, as I mentioned, Trinity has long been investing in gateway cities in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and we've worked in Brockton, Lowell, Lawrence, Taunton. We've been looking to Worcester for quite some time and just never could really find the right fit. So it was somewhat opportunistic when, the opportunity with the courthouse came up. It was sort of a perfect fit for us. We like the difficult and complex projects. This one maybe was a little bit too complex, but it has turned out to be everything that we hoped for and more. So that has been great, and it's been an absolute pleasure working in Worcester with the administration, the residents. It's just been a great experience all around.
It's good to hear. How about you, Mark?
Our inspiration was really our founder and CEO's late father, Menkiti. He was a philosophy professor his entire life and inspired us to come to Worcester 5 or 6 years ago. I visited with Bo, and we got to know the city manager and the administration, and really fell in love with the city immediately. I'm an architect by trade, so I was like a kid in a candy store walking down Main Street, seeing the beautiful, the cultural resources that are there. And really, when we look to develop, a particular area, we look at the macroeconomics and, the job market, the industries, technology, the educational opportunities, which Worcester has in spades, and then really the support of the jurisdiction, city leaders, and everything we saw in Worcester pointed to a really great renaissance and some great acceleration of that marketplace. We were just excited to be a part of it. So that inspiration from Bo's father brought us there. He had purchased actually the 6th Chatham property at that time. So we were engaged, and he kind of reached out to us for our help, and that became the start of a great relationship.
Where are you on leasing out Chatham?
Chatham is 100% leased, fully leased in under 3 months, which was actually surprising. We delivered in a really tough time of the year, end of the year, mid-November. Yeah, we were fully leased by February. So taking reservations for the next few openings.
Next tranche. Okay, great. Chip, you mostly focus on commercial projects, or entirely focus on commercial projects, office space and retail in Worcester. Mark and Mike, you guys work with both residential and office retail, mixed use. Many of your projects are in the downtown area. Many cities across the country have been essentially reborn. We talk about the Worcester Renaissance with increased housing at the city's core. What's the future for downtown Worcester from a residential and a commercial development perspective? Do you guys see residential condos as being part of a viable part of downtown Worcester? Do you see more office buildings, more retail? What do you, Chip, let's start with you.
Well, on the commercial side, I think the development of downtown is really promoting a livable city, and that's why you're seeing a real surge in residential development. That combined with the fact that the rents have gotten to the point in Worcester such that you can do high quality renovations or new construction, as you saw 145 Front Street and other projects now on the drawing board, ground up construction. The residential is a great driver for commercial because, once again, as the city becomes more livable, walkable, becomes an 18-hour environment, which is what we're trying to promote. That just promotes the retail and the commercial development also. So we welcome the residential development. We're actually looking at the feasibility of adding residential to our project as well as hotels. So really being a true mixed use project that's an 18-hour a day environment.
That's great. Chip, weighed in. How about Mark? How about you? What do you see?
I agree. I think the residential density really needs to be developed further in downtown. That's been our focus along the Main Street corridor. A lot of the commercial buildings that we've acquired, we're going to go through conversions to bring more residential density, because that really leads the commercial tenants into these areas. I talked about the cultural resources, the great cultural resources of downtown Worcester. The Hanover Theater is just an icon of downtown, and that's been, again, one of the reasons we focused on that area, delivering high quality residential that brings in high quality retail tenants. We've got a couple restaurants signed up for 554 Main that we'll be starting construction on shortly, and they're part and parcel. One follows the other. So we're excited to continue that walk down Main Street and deliver great projects in these former architectural gems that just need a little TLC.
Mike, you have anything to?
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore what Chip and Mark said, well, first, I've worked in Worcester personally since 2010, and it's changed absolutely incredibly in that time. It really is a walkable, almost 18-hour, as Chip mentioned, neighborhood, and it's getting more and more so as more units become available. More people are living within walking distance of downtown. It does sort of work hand in hand with the development of a lot of the great restaurants and bars and retail that's going in as well. I think that there's a lot of growth potential still for downtown. There's a huge demand for housing at all income levels throughout Worcester, but particularly downtown. And I think, as Chip was mentioning, that companies or businesses are looking to be in a more urban environment. We're seeing a lot of residents wanting to be in a more walkable urban environment too. So if you work, sort of around 495, you might choose to live in downtown Worcester rather than living out in the suburbs, even though you work in the suburbs. And that's something that I think is a relatively newer trend for Worcester.
How do you think, I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but how do you think that the transportation in the area needs to change to make that a little more attractive and feasible for people? Russ, do you have any ideas about that? And then we'll circle back to Mike.
I mean, regarding transportation, you're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah, I mean, you work in the neighborhoods, right? So if you don't own a car, you're going to be on the Worcester Transit to get anywhere, which is not as quick as it could be.
Right. Well, I find, because I'm dealing mostly in the neighborhoods, the type of transportation people are walking or using a bicycle. And so the quality of the road, sidewalks, and lighting are top and paramount to everything else, and safety. So all of those things combined, and I think Worcester's made tremendous strides in improving a lot of those things. We've all been inconvenienced by all those road construction projects, but for definitely a benefit to all for years to come. And people have often said that they like the walkability. Even from the Elm Park neighborhood, everybody now sees that it seems like less of a distance because it's an easier walk. It's an easier, bicycle trip. So that's from my end of it. As long as there's decent off-street parking, which tends to be sometimes a problem for some people. That's why they'll choose to do the other alternatives instead of driving. So
sure. Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, I think to Russ's point about really just the public, the streetscape, the hardscape, the city has been investing heavily in Main Street for many years, and seeing that transition, especially during COVID, you saw a really dramatic shift from Chatham Street all the way to the other side of the courthouse. That dramatic change in the streetscape changes perceptions. And the Union Station renovations, all the investment that has gone into the transportation network between Worcester and Boston and Springfield is really apparent. And I myself have taken the train many times from Boston in and walked over to the office on Main Street. But that perception is changing. We're reintroducing folks to downtown Worcester that maybe haven't spent a lot of time in downtown for ages and generations even, who see that certain areas, even south of Main, south of Chatham Street, even near the Hanover Theater, is a off-limits neighborhood that is really, the perception is shifting dramatically due to these projects being completed one by one. So excited for that continued transformation.
I'm looking forward to seeing the they're calling it, the art lighting in the tunnels. It should be interesting to see. It's that connection to that neighborhood will be terrific from downtown. Russ, you just made we talked about, you made a significant investment in the Elm Park neighborhood. And you mentioned that your work tends to focus around college campuses and student housing. One of the things that the city has talked about for years is retention of the college graduates, keeping them in the city working here. Are you seeing any signs that we're succeeding at retaining graduates? And if so, why do you think that is?
Well, I absolutely have. I don't have actual statistics. I only know from my own personal portfolio, more anecdotal information. First, the pandemic has created the employers' willingness to allow their people to work remotely. So if graduate suddenly gets a job offer in Boston or New York, they are not faced with the dilemma of having to move to those locations. They can oftentimes retain their apartment, stay where they are, take that job elsewhere and now half the living cost of those alternatives instead of moving to Boston or New York. So that has been something that's changed, I think, for the better, because it's given people choice, which is always good for everyone, and things have evolved. I think also Worcester has done a better job of what I was speaking about earlier when Ed Augustus listened, walked these neighborhoods and said that, walkability, safety, and the feeling of comfort like neighborhoods works so that people feel like they can call this their home, not just a transition point where they got their education, but they want to move somewhere more desirable. And in their words, it's now become a more favorable place for people to stay. They have friends here, they've got jobs either here or elsewhere, and they feel comfortable where they are. And I love the fact because now we have a number of our residents have not just become undergraduates, they stay on as graduate school and they stay on as their home after they take a position somewhere, often in the medical. I will say to some of the developers that are here dealing with commercial space, there was a lot of influx, and I think Chip had mentioned this, that now businesses are coming in from outside of the area, creating more jobs. So, people certainly have to go where their employment might be, and having an increased employer base has certainly helped.
Makes sense. Do you guys all think that as we're easing into the post-pandemic world, that it's obviously limited to certain sectors of employees? Some people have to actually show up to their job site, but we have less expensive rents. Are you guys, Mike and Mark, are you guys seeing people, particularly younger workers, moving farther west, away from Boston, Somerville, Cambridge, into Worcester?
It's definitely a theme. It's definitely a theme that's being presented through conversations that we have with prospective tenants. We've seen a dramatic uptick in the commercial activity, just the tours, the folks that are interested in leasing space. Just in the last 6 months, there was quite a downturn through the first 18 months of the pandemic, but we are feeling a turn and signed a couple leases just in the last few months that are indicating that shift. But I think, yes, we are certainly selling that story of downtown Worcester being a viable future growth experience for local grads, that we want them to see all the cultural resources and support they have in this region from the business standpoint for growing a small business into what could be a very large business, and they could do it all right here in Worcester. They don't need to look at Boston. There's all the activity and all the resources and support right here in Worcester, and I think that perception is changing.
One of your projects has an incubator space too, doesn't it?
Yeah, we recently opened a collaborative workspace called Emerge right in 554 Main, across from the Hanover Theater. So a place for small, up and coming folks to have a space to grow. We have lease space in that building as well for smaller businesses that want to interact with those type of kind of entrepreneurial growing businesses as well. So we are also building out the new mass hire workforce center in that same building at 554 Main. So their new headquarters and the central region workforce board will be co-located there. So that's another resource for small growing businesses to have access to potential employees, and just access to future growth and educational opportunities from a business acumen standpoint.
Mike, how about you? Are you seeing a lot of people moving west?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the new world of remote work, we've definitely seen people who have chosen to live in our building and in Worcester. And interestingly, I mean, they could have chosen to live anywhere, but they chose to live in Worcester. I think that there's a lot of unique attributes. Our building is really unique, but also downtown and Worcester in general is pretty unique, and it's got it's got that sort of growing vibe that I think people like. We've talked to a lot of our residents, and it's across all income levels too, from full market rate, they really could live anywhere, but also in some of our more affordable units, we see people who are choosing to live there when they do have other choices. With remote work, they could choose to live in Framingham or south of Boston or wherever, but they're choosing to live in Worcester, and that's been a good trend from our standpoint.
So tying that together, I mean, one of the things that Chip mentioned earlier was, rents have finally reached a place where they make construction financially feasible for developers. 10 years ago, apartments in downtown were among the most affordable in the city. Now they are not on the low end of the spectrum. So there's some luxury apartments. I know, Mike, you guys have mixed affordability, but how do we make the city, especially the downtown, an area of different diversity with income as well? How do you make those numbers work? And has the state helped with those, with workforce and affordable and mixed income projects? Mark, Mike, why don't you start?
Okay, yeah, I mean, our project was absolutely, well, first of all, historic tax credits were essential. Absolutely essential for our project. And I think if you looked at all of our projects, they're all in existing buildings, or most of them are in existing buildings, and a lot of them, if not most of them, utilize historic tax credits, I'm sure. Those are incredibly important. They were absolutely essential to our project. But, we looked, and we sort of specialize in mixed income development, and it was the state was incredibly supportive of our project. They knew the importance of that particular building and this particular project for the city of Worcester and central Massachusetts, and there was a great investment from the state to assist us with providing apartments really for everybody. And we've got very low income residents living there alongside with people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And it's been pretty tremendous and an incredible experience to see that come together. But it would not have been possible without the support of the state with those funding sources.
Historic tax credits. How about you, Mark? Do you guys use any of the low income housing tax credits or anything else?
We've not delivered a low income housing project in Worcester. We have experience of delivered that elsewhere on the East Coast. But to Michael's point, the subsidies such as historic tax credits are vital to these buildings that have been vacant, been operating on shoestring budgets for years. So there's deferred maintenance. If you're talking roofs and exterior openings and fenestration, the project budgets become unwieldy very quickly. And I would say there's a particular challenge for the smaller projects. We've got a number of smaller projects in the 20 to 40 range of residential units that this situation is exacerbated because you still have the same high utility, infrastructure costs, the soft costs, design and construction costs are exacerbated in that smaller stack of capital. So a project like Chatham Lofts, we had federal historic credits, we had state historic credits. We're fortunate to be able to work with the city and the state and receive a HDIP, the Housing Development Incentive Program credit as well, which was vital. It made the project functionally work from a capital standpoint. Without those, that the building would sit dormant and vacant for years to come. So they're critical and absolutely vital to a gateway city like Worcester redeveloping its downtown, because there's these smaller historic buildings throughout, sprinkled up and down Main Street and the side streets beyond, that without the subsidy, they would not be able to be developed. So I would make a position that the state needs to do more. You know, when you look at a program like the HDIP, I think it was a $10 million allocation this past year for 90 or 100 million of subscription. So vastly oversubscribed, and the need is greatly outweighs the annual subscription. So I think the state can certainly do more. And if you look at the overall state budget, it's a raindrop in the bucket of the overall budget. So I push everyone involved in any legislation or state budget process to push for more for housing, and especially in gateway cities such as Worcester.
How about you, Russ? Do you use any of the tax credits, or is there a different type that you think would be useful for you?
Well, there could be if I use them. I have found of the 450 units that I've purchased and renovated in Worcester, I've not used any incentives whatsoever. No grants. I've not had any tax incentive programs, partially because each of my programs or projects have been substantially smaller than any of the larger developments that Mark, Mike, and Chip are referring to. So the paperwork and costs associated with getting those done in the timeline are not usually appropriate for things that can get started. We can get the shovel in the dirt quickly and get it resolved within 6 months, not years. But I think if there were other types of programs, which I think there's one coming up for residential purposes that doesn't have as many restrictions on how you can use it, I'm very hopeful for that, because I think it's going to bring a lot of opportunity for smaller multifamily homeowners to come and renovate their properties, upgrade the standard of living in the neighborhood without having to have large bank loans and so forth. So that's something almost on the horizon. I think terms and parameters will be set sometime by the summer, which will be a boon, I think, to the inner neighborhoods for some improvements. Looking forward to that.
Yeah, especially after the article about the age of our housing stock. I'm sure that something for the smaller, multifamily, the 3-deckers would be very, very well received.
I agree.
Our rents are lower, but the cost of construction is the same. So we've talked a little bit about how to make housing projects viable. Chip, what kind of incentives are needed to make building new office or retail or lab commercial space attractive to developers?
Well, that's a challenge. Today, if you want to build an office building, you have to have rents in the $50 to $60 a foot range. In this market, it's $25 to $26 a foot. So it's just not financially feasible. There really aren't enhancements or incentives, either federal or state programs, that could make up that gap. So barring a large tenant coming into this market who wants to build their headquarters or build the building for themselves, hard to see how any new office would be built downtown. The lab space gets up there a little bit, $35 to $40 a foot is the market. So you're getting closer to get the economics to work. But that too is going to be a challenge to build any sort of lab, multi-story lab building downtown with the rents. So you're going to see really on the office side, the stock is going to be probably renovated office buildings where the rents can be maintained in the mid $25 to $30 foot range. The market has creeped up nicely over the last 5 to 8 years. It kind of kicked around at $18 to $21 a foot. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, the market started to move up a little bit, and we're now at averaging $25, $26, $27 a foot in rents. So the commercial market has improved from a rent standpoint, but still, as compared to major markets like Boston, it's diluted down, or it's very low. Interesting fact: the companies that are looking at Worcester now, coming from the east, to say Marlboro, those rents actually are lower than Worcester for Class A space. So companies that are coming here are are coming here even knowing that they may pay a little more in rent than where they currently exist. So that's a good sign, which means they're moving for other reasons besides economic.
That's a great thing. Two follow-up questions. One is, you mentioned state and federal incentives. What about the city tax incentives, things like that the city is providing? Has the hot real estate market kind of put a—
Well, that's a good question. On the commercial side, the rate is just simple math, works out to about $3, $3.50 a foot. So you can see when you've got a $25 a foot rent, that's more than, that's a substantial number, more than 10% of your revenue coming in. So that's a challenge that we have to work with. There are opportunities for new construction, as the residential folks may be able to speak to, as it relates to residential and hotel, opportunities for tax adjustments with the city to get these newer projects up and going. And the city's done that in the past and probably will continue to do that to help along the new construction projects.
Okay, great. And then we had talked a little bit earlier about that there's certainly been a perception that, particularly since the pandemic, that office utilization rates are way down. But you're saying that's not what you're seeing. Do you think that that's going to, that pandemic effect, so to speak, is just a blip, and that are we all going back to the office, I guess, is really the question.
Not all of us. It's interesting. I think we now, at least in my property, see pretty much the way this is going to shake out, which is, I'd say more than 50% of our tenants are going to be on a hybrid remote in office. So our population, let's just say, might have run at 75% on a daily basis, is probably going to be at 50 to 60%. So a change, not dramatic. As it relates to footprint, if that person is going to be in 1 or 2 days a week, they still need a place to work. So they might be sharing space, but they also may just have their own office. So an interesting fact, during the pandemic, we renewed 140,000 feet of existing leases, with two of those being major tenants in our building. And they signed 10-year leases. They reduced their footprint by about 5%. So not a dramatic change from what they were in pre-pandemic. Once again, the theory was ultimately your workforce is coming back to work. It may not be every day, but they're coming back to work. We're seeing some firms right back to business as usual, which I would say more law firms are going in that direction. But most of our companies look like they're a 3-2 sort of situation. Then the one major company is actually is building out space that's going to be for remote workers, so they have a place to come and hang their hat once or twice a week. And so that's a shared office concept, but that's certainly not the norm we're seeing. That's unusual situation what they're doing.
That's interesting. Okay, how about the pandemic's effect on retail? I mean, obviously that's a little hard to separate out from just the change in how we have lived over the last 10 years with increased e-commerce and, but however, we're starting to develop the concept that perhaps e-commerce isn't all that it's cracked up to be. Supporting local businesses is important. And then, some concerns about the effect of e-commerce on climate change as well. Are you guys seeing any changes with retail for your?
Our retail is entertainment, food driven. It's not your typical, what I would call bricks and mortar retail stores, for instance. So I can only speak as it relates to the market niche that we're fitting. And our 2 restaurants, 2 Mercantile pushed right ahead through the pandemic and wanted to open coming out of the pandemic, thinking there'd be a pent up demand. As he's seen in his other 15 plus restaurants in and around Boston, business has been terrific as we come out of the pandemic. Ruth's Chris, quite frankly, delayed their project because they weren't quite sure how their market was going to respond to post-pandemic, but then agreed to plow forward 6 or 7 months ago for an opening this summer. That's an interesting fact as you brought up the millennial. Both restaurants are focused on the millennial market. Two Mercantile certainly, as that's an upscale, I would call an upscale millennial level bar. And then Ruth's Chris is changing its model away from the older crowd and trying to build a new market with the millennials. So that was actually one of the reasons we got Ruth's Chris to come to Worcester, was to be able to roll out their new brand and go after a younger sector. The space that we've got left to lease, once again, is entertainment related, and we're seeing that market bouncing back very nicely. Once again, on the theory, there's pent up demand with restaurants and venues that have closed and didn't open. And there's going to be a similar demand, if not greater, for that kind of space and use as we go into the future.
Yeah, I can personally guarantee there's pent up demand. Trying to get out, get something to eat, go to a show is overdue. So changes also with development, some of the things that have been a challenge are somewhat new, not just with the pandemic, but also, the war in the Ukraine, and the interest rates are increasing, and fuel supply and bottlenecks with supply chains. And are these factors affecting your projects or changing the way you do business? How about you, Russ?
In some ways, yes. There are certain products that are very difficult to get, no certainty of when you'll get them. For example, restoring a lot of these historic properties. There's always the question, restore and renovate the windows and retain them, which the Historic Commission likes, or replace them, which I personally prefer. The problem is custom windows is something that's incredibly oversized and unique, and you want to match it exactly. There's no hope of getting it within the few months you may need it. It may be 6 months, if at all. And that's the problem. There's uncertainty. So what I've changed is learning to restore windows and maintain them, the original historic functioning. And that was a big change for me. Even the Historic Commission was quite surprised when I was not petitioning them to replace windows. They were aghast. They thought I was changing, but I feel that's been more out of necessity, and time will tell how much the residents appreciate that versus the weatherization effects and so forth. So that's the biggest single change. The other items are we're making material choices a little differently based on what's that we can secure availability. We might have plans in place, 6 months in advance, but when you get to ordering it, because there's a real boom in building, you just can't get certain things. So you have to be able to be nimble with choices on finished product.
So flexibility. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would echo that. The flexibility extends really, I think, more deeper even in engineering systems. The electrical equipment has been particularly hit hard, from generators to just panel board switchgear that could be 6 months instead of 6 weeks. So dramatic shifts in delivery time periods that just encourages our engineering teams and our architects and designers to be more flexible and more malleable, whether they typically like to go with one particular manufacturer. Now they find an alternative or an equivalent substitute from another manufacturer, as Russ said, that may be readily available. So it's had to adjust in that respect, but it still is having adverse impacts on projects. We've got 554 Main, this collaborative workspace that we built out. We're still waiting for a switchboard that was ordered more than 6 months ago. We're able to exist and operate on temporary power in the interim, but those types of things are unexpected and unanticipated, but trying to roll with the punches and be as flexible as we can and come up with creative solutions and workarounds where necessary. So they're not insurmountable challenges because there's always an alternative, but it's certainly a different way of doing business.
If I can just add on to what Mark said about that, when you finish a project and it looks beautiful and you think you're ready for occupancy, you're reliant on sign-offs on the building inspectors and wiring inspectors, and especially the fire department. I'm finding one of the vulnerabilities of stock availability are fire alarm equipment and some of the very specific pieces that are the linchpin to the fire department signing off. You can't occupy a beautiful building like the Chatham Lofts until you get sign-offs from the fire department. And those small components that you used to take for granted at any number of electrical supply houses are nowhere to be found anywhere in New England. And so now you're finding you have to plan well in advance to get that stuff or put your requests in well before you ever needed them, because you can have quite an abrupt surprise if you're planning an occupancy of September 1 and you're nowhere near available options to open your doors. And that's kind of a stressful item.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
got to
I've
be a
experienced firsthand.
Yeah, it's
very
forcing us-
unpleasant surprise.
Forcing us to be better planners, better deciders of projects to make sure that things are built into the schedule at the very outset. Like Russ said, things that we used to take for granted. So it's and making us better.
Interesting. Okay.
True.
So talking about planning and planning ahead, do you guys take a look at the demographics for Worcester before you plan your projects? And if so, what do you see happening on that front? I mean, we saw a 14% growth from the last census, which is just an amazing number. Do you expect to see something, similar to that? Mike, how about you?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as we were just talking about, while there have been a lot of challenges the last couple of years, it's been very weird. And as Mark said, we've gotten better and having to be flexible and getting creative about doing things. But the demand is absolutely there. It continues to be there. And we foresee it being there in the future. It's something that, yes, we do keep an eye on the demographics and where we project things to go, but we don't really, particularly in the affordable sector in Worcester and throughout Massachusetts, there's just an unbelievable demand. So that's something that we look to build into our projects while we meet demand on sort of the market side. We also sort of address some demand, which is not necessarily being met in the middle incomes and the lower income levels as well.
Okay. Chip, how about you with commercial projects? Do you study the demographics?
Yeah, the demographic study analysis is really on the retail side. And I will say Ruth Chris went through a very extensive analysis a couple of years ago before making the decision on Worcester, based on Worcester proper and the surrounding towns and being able to afford basically a high-end restaurant and a meal of $40, $50 a serving. So they made the assessment that the economic infrastructure, so to speak, of Worcester was going to work for their product. To Mercantile, not so much, because they're not really in the high-priced bracket, and they're relying on kind of a different market. So they didn't really, and they had their experience from Shrewsbury. They have a restaurant there, so they saw that market and how that was responding to their product and their price point. So, but clearly the demographics and the economic infrastructure of Worcester are very strong and growing, and that will really just help on the retail end, no question about it.
Well, if we're going to grow by another 14%, because you're going to have to get cracking on the housing stuff even faster than you are. We're going to have to wrap up soon so we can take some questions, but you guys have expressed in various times, and other developers have said as well, that the outgoing city manager at Augustus and his administration have made the city pretty user-friendly for you guys for development. If you could give the city manager one piece of advice to ensure that we have the continued growth that you're anticipating, what would it be? Russ, why don't we start with you?
I would say trust some of the veterans that are still in the administration that have developed relationships, and trust them because the people on this panel, part of the importance of our success is with relationships that we have fostered within the city infrastructure, whether it be inspectional services or city hall. And there's some wonderful people that care, and they also know the people who care and develop with the right community efforts in mind. So if the new city manager can rely on getting a quick primer on who's the right person to work with and what people stand for, it'll go a long way towards forging a stronger relationship with each person so that they can continue and not have a hiccup or an interruption in trying to reestablish a relationship with the city manager. That would be helpful.
Great. Mark.
I would say engage. I think our first introduction to Worcester was a meeting with the city manager, and his open arm approach, just the welcome spirit that he had to a group of outsiders, coming from DC at that time. Although Bo, native from Massachusetts, had some history in the area, but the welcoming spirit and the open arms that we received as developers was unheard of. I had not experienced anything in my professional life like that, and that endeared us to the city. And again, we fell in love with the town and fell in love with the people, the spirit, the grit, the determination to build, a better Worcester into the future for not only this generation but generations to come. Was something that infected us, and we carry that through to every project and every day we work downtown.
Thank you. How about Chip? How about you?
Well, I concur. Ed's been a terrific driver of development in Worcester and going to be missed. And but my hat's off really to the whole administration, from Executive Development Director Peter Dunn, City Manager, City Council, obviously very important if a project needs any sort of incentives or city support. And inspectional services are terrific. They are great to work with, very professional and very efficient. So I think the whole infrastructure, although Ed was and is an important part of it, I think that can be replaced, and the rest of the system is in pretty good stead going forward. So the city's always been pro-development. You're hearing from outsiders. That's one of the reasons that I've developed in Worcester for 30 plus years, is it's a city and a market that you can work with the city and the administration to get these projects up and going.
Thank you. Mike, any words of advice for the new city manager, whoever he or she may be?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everyone else. I mean, it's totally been said, but our project was truly a public-private partnership with the city. They really originally had the vision to redevelop what it was truly an iconic property within the city, and needed to be redeveloped somehow. And I think the administration throughout had that in mind and helped us along every step of the way, and that was really important. So going forward, just to continue those relationships, as Russ mentioned, is incredibly important.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for participating. I think Chip's words about being in good hands with the rest of the city administration and talking about the spirit and grit of Worcester are just dead on. That's always been the calling card and the charm of Worcester is its spirit and its grit. So thank you all very much for joining us, and I turn it back to Peter.
Do we really have to end right now? I know it's 9:58. That was
I have a lot more questions, but
oh, I know, I do too, and I saw some others coming in. I think not only will we share the tape afterwards, but I think there were a couple of questions. Someone asked Russ about that specific state program that's being developed, and I think we'll maybe get an answer from you and send some notes out to all attendees for any questions that we didn't get to that might have been on the tip of people's tongues. I had a question about that HDIP program too. Maybe we can include a link and a little information on that as well. So anyways, fabulous conversation. Thank you all for being part of it. And it's you can really get a sense of this momentum is real, right? And it sounds like we're just keep on barreling through. City manager position, an important one, but as Chip said, it's great to know that the whole administration is on the right track, and great conversation. So thank you, Samantha, Mark, Chip, Michael, and Russ. Thank you to our platinum sponsors, Bowditch and Dewey, Workers Credit Union, and our gold sponsors, Mogul Architects and UMass Chan Medical School, and our supporting sponsors, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts and Lamoureux Pagano Associates and Architects. And of course, special thanks to our event partner, and co-creator of this series, State House News. Just a reminder, we'll include a link to this recording. Thank you all for joining us this morning and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.